A piercing shriek sliced through the aircraft's stillness, as sudden and sharp as a knife through cloth. "Everyone down. Get down now." Four dark figures moved through the aisles of Atlantic 84-7 with the smooth grace of hunters who had practiced this moment countless times. The emergency lights pulsed red, bathing the Boeing 777s inside in a color like fresh wounds. 247 people on the night journey from Frankfurt to Washington, D.C. instantly dropped. A wave of bodies folded into brace positions, as if controlled by one unseen master. Derek Stone walked slowly down the middle aisle. He gripped his pistol level with his shoulder, its dark barrel gliding over the rows of terrified passengers. He was tall, thin, with sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the utter emptiness in his pale gray eyes. A former CIA agent, with 12 years of field work before he switched sides. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had taken lives before, and would do so again without losing a wink of sleep. "Anyone who lifts their head," he declared, his voice carrying the flat, neutral tone of someone who had spent years hiding where they came from, dies first. Behind him, Mason Cole moved like a bull in a delicate shop, all 240 pounds of former soldier checking seat pockets and overhead bins with rough force. Blake Rivers had already taken control of the cockpit, holding his ceramic knife to Captain Daniel Webb's neck through the quickly opened door. And bringing up the rear, Aidan Mills swung his weapon across the economy section with the quick, jerky motions of a young man driven by both adrenaline and strong beliefs. The crying began almost immediately. A child somewhere near row 30, an older woman praying in Spanish, a businessman in a fancy suit whimpering into his hands. These were the sounds of 247 people facing their own end, 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Derek's eyes systematically scanned the cabin. Business class held the usual executives and government officials, all clearly scared. Economy had the typical mix of families, tourists and students pressing into their seats as if they could vanish into the cushions. Then his gaze reached the very last row, seat 47F. A woman small, perhaps 5'4". Her dark hair was tied back in a messy ponytail that looked like it hadn't been brushed in days. She wore an oversized gray hooded sweatshirt, the kind you'd find in any university store, and old jeans with a tear in one knee. Her feet tucked under her were bare, her shoes kicked off somewhere on the floor. She was curled up tightly, like a cat seeking warmth, and she was sound asleep. Amidst 247 people screaming, crying, and praying for their lives, this woman was sleeping. Derek felt his lips twist into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Mason," the big man looked up from rummaging through an overhead compartment. Derek nodded toward the back of the plane. "That one, the sleeping beauty in 47F. Drag her out here. Let's show everyone what happens to people who don't pay attention." Mason Cole grinned, showing a chipped front tooth he'd gotten in a bar fight in Johannesburg. He enjoyed this part, always, the terror in their eyes when they realized that fate had chosen them, specifically them, for punishment. He moved down the aisle with heavy steps, passengers shrinking away from him as he passed. The woman didn't stop. Mason reached down and grabbed a handful of her ponytail, yanking hard enough to pull her entirely from the seat and into the aisle. She hit the floor silently. No shriek, no gasp, no automatic curse. Her eyes stayed closed. The whole cabin held its breath, watching this small woman crumpled on the industrial carpet like a discarded toy. Mason scowled, clearly annoyed by her lack of reaction, and grabbed her arm to turn her onto her back. For the briefest moment, less than a heartbeat, her body moved in a way that didn't quite match the lifeless doll-like limpness she showed. Her shoulder tucked, her hip turned, her hands came up in a controlled motion that spread the impact across her forearms instead of her spine. Then she was shaking, her hands covering her face, her body curled into the fetal position of pure fear. No one noticed the quick inconsistency. No one except a man with gray hair in business class, seat 8A, who lowered his book and watched with suddenly narrowed eyes. "Look at this," Derek called out, making his voice loud enough to reach every corner of the cabin. "This is what happens when someone doesn't take us seriously." Mason pulled back his hand and slapped the woman hard across the face. The sound echoed through the silent plane. Blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. She still didn't open her eyes. Pathetic. Mason spat a glob of saliva landing on her cheek. Wake up, princess. Time to die. But in the next 45 minutes, these hijackers would realize the huge mistake they had made. They had just woken up the wrong person. The woman in seat 47F had boarded Atlantic 8047 6 hours earlier in Frankfurt International Airport. She had arrived at the gate with 7 minutes to spare, no checked luggage, carrying only a small backpack that held 3 changes of underwear, a toothbrush, a well-worn paperback book, and a passport identifying her as Hazel Cooper, independent consultant. The passport was real. The name was real. The job description was a carefully made-up story, kept up by the Central Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division for the past 12 years. 6 hours before the hijacking, Hazel had been sitting alone at an airport bar, slowly drinking a whiskey she didn't intend to finish. The dark circles under her eyes told the story of the past 72 hours, though she would never speak of it to anyone outside a top-secret briefing room. 3 targets removed in Prague, 1 mission gone wrong in Vienna, 47 hours without sleep, and another 8-hour flight before she could finally close her eyes in her own bed. The bartender, a friendly German woman with a butterfly tattoo on her wrist, had asked if she was okay. Hazel had smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes, and said she was just tired. The bartender had nodded sympathetically, thinking she was looking at a weary businesswoman, or perhaps a student returning home after a semester abroad. She had no way of knowing that the small, tired-looking woman in front of her had killed 3 men in the past 3 days, or that the way Hazel held her whiskey glass, her fingers positioned to allow for quick movement, was a habit taught to her during years of training that most people couldn't imagine. When Hazel boarded the plane, she chose seat 47F. Specifically, last row, window seat, back against the solid wall, clear views of both aisles, maximum distance from the cockpit, which meant maximum time to spot any danger before it reached her. The seat beside the emergency exit over the wing had better fighting value in some situations, but she was too tired for fighting tonight. She just wanted to sleep. The young man in 47A had tried to start a conversation as she settled in. Noah Bennett, according to the MIT sweatshirt he wore, with an eager smile and the kind of innocent excitement that made Hazel feel ancient. Long flight, huh? I'm Noah, heading home for winter break. Do you work? Hazel had said, her voice flat, already reaching for the button to lean back her seat. Oh, cool. What do you do? Consulting. Nice. Nice. What kind of consulting? Hazel had turned to look at him then, and something in her eyes, some shadow that lived in the space between who she pretended to be and who she actually was, made Noah's smile fade. The boring kind, she said. If you'll excuse me, I need to sleep. She had closed her eyes before he could reply, her breathing slowing into the controlled rhythm of someone who had learned to find rest in circumstances far worse than an economy seat on a flight across the ocean. But she wasn't truly asleep. She was never truly asleep. Some part of her mind remained constantly alert, noting the sounds and movements around her even as her body recovered from the demands she placed upon it. The change in engine sound as they reached cruising height, the rhythm of the drink cart moving through the cabin, the footsteps of the flight attendants, each with their own unique sound. The crying child in row 32, the snoring businessman, 4 rows ahead. When the screaming started, when the hijackers made their move, Hazel had been awake for about 0.3 seconds before she decided to stay still. Not out of fear but out of careful thought. In that fraction of a second, she had processed the information and reached a tactical conclusion. 4 enemies based on the different voices shouting orders, at least 2 firearms based on the metallic sounds she'd heard, unknown number of other weapons, unknown level of training. 247 regular people trapped in a small space, with nowhere to run and no real cover. Acting immediately would feel good. Acting smartly would save more lives. So Hazel Cooper, codename Sandman, 12 years of service in operations that would never appear in any official history, allowed herself to be dragged from her seat like a scared girl. She let the big one, the one who smelled of old sweat and cheap cologne, slap her hard enough to split her lip. She lay on the floor of the plane, blood in her mouth and spit on her cheek, and she did not move, because in the time it took Mason Cole to feel satisfied with his show of power, Hazel had already counted the enemies, 4 confirmed, checked their weapons, 2 Glock 19s, 1 Beretta, at least 2 knives, possibly explosives under one man's jacket, identified their locations, leader in the aisle near row 20, muscle standing over her, tech expert in the cockpit, the wild one roaming economy, found possible allies, the man with gray hair in business class, who sat too straight, the flight attendant whose eyes were too calm, the old man in row 35 who carried himself like a soldier, figured out 3 possible escape routes, 2 emergency exits, 1 crew door, and formed the basic outline of a plan, all without opening her eye. Now lying on the floor, while Derek Stone announced to the cabin that she would be the first to die, Hazel allowed herself one small pleasure. She began to count the seconds, the minutes, the chances, because every moment these men believed she was helpless was a moment she could use. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We post military stories like this 3 times a week. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The woman they just slapped. Let's just say appearances can be very misleading. Now back to Flight 8. The man in seat 8A had stopped reading his book the moment the hijackers showed themselves. Colonel James Crawford, United States Army, retired, had spent 33 years in uniform, the last 18 of those leading operations that existed only as blacked-out paragraphs in secret documents. His gut feelings had been yelling at him since before the screaming started, some ancient part of his brain noticing the subtle wrongness in how 4 passengers had been moving through the cabin during the drink service. Now watching the woman at the back of the plane take a beating without making a sound, those instincts were yelling something else entirely. He'd seen that before. The way she fell, the unconscious muscle memory of someone taught to take hits, to lessen damage, to look helpless while remaining completely unbroken. SEER training, survival, evasion, resistance, escape. He'd designed parts of that course himself decades ago, had watched hundreds of soldiers break under pretend torture, had watched a few, the special ones, learn to bend without breaking. This woman was bending. Crawford kept his face carefully neutral, as the hijacker leader, Derek, ordered the crew to tie all passengers with plastic cuffs. He gave in to the restraints without argument, noting with professional appreciation that they secured his hands in front of his body rather than behind. An amateur error. Harder to manage, but much easier to use as a weapon if needed. His eyes went back to the woman in row 47 as Mason Cole roughly secured her wrists. The big man had been careless, leaving her hands in front as well, probably because he wanted easy access to her later. Crawford saw the woman's fingers move just slightly, testing the tightness of the plastic, and he recognized that too. She was judging, figuring things out, planning. "Who are you?" Crawford wondered, his mind already running through possibilities. Not military, not with that fake identity, not FBI or Secret Service, not on an international flight without backup. That left a very short list of agencies that trained people to vanish into normal life, so completely that even a seasoned agent like himself couldn't spot them until they wanted to be spotted. As if she felt his attention, the woman's head turned slightly, her closed eyes somehow finding his position in business class across the entire plane. Crawford felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that look. He'd seen it before in the eyes of the rare individuals who worked in the spaces between countries, who did the work that allowed people like Senator Martha Williams, 3 rows ahead of him and currently being identified by the hijackers as a valuable hostage, to sleep safely at night. The woman wasn't just trained, she was working a mission, and she was waiting. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Webb kept his hands visible on the controls, exactly as told. The ceramic knife pressed against his carotid artery was a strong reason to obey. Blake Rivers stood behind him, occasionally checking instruments and passing information to Derek through a small radio. "We've got about 9 hours of fuel," Webb said carefully, keeping his voice steady. A former Air Force pilot, with 2 tours in the Middle East, he wasn't about to let fear make him do something foolish. "Whatever course change you're planning, You need to tell me soon, or we won't have options. Blake snorted. We'll tell you when we tell you, flyboy. Just keep this bird flying straight and pray your passengers behave. Webb's eyes moved to the cockpit door, strengthened after 9/11, designed to be unbreakable from the outside, useless when the danger was already inside. There are children on this plane, he said quietly. Family. Whatever your goal is, whatever point you're trying to make, they don't need to be part of it. Blake leaned close, his breath hot against Webb's ear. Everyone's part of it, Captain. That's the whole point. In the main cabin, Derek had set up his command post near the front of economy class where he could see both directions and watch his men. Mason had taken a position near the back, clearly intending to stay close to the woman he'd already singled out for his personal amusement. Aiden moved restlessly through the rows, kicking seats, shouting at passengers who dared to look up, his behavior growing wilder with each passing minute. Derek watched his youngest recruit with carefully hidden worry. Aiden was a true believer, which made him useful, but also unpredictable. The boy had never killed anyone before, not directly, and that lack of experience was starting to show in his trembling hands and the shaky sound of his voice. At row 35, Aiden stopped in front of an old man with white hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades outdoors. The passenger list had identified him as Silas Morrison, retired, but something about him bothered Aiden. What are you looking at, old-timer? Silas slowly raised his tired eyes. Nothing, son. Just waiting like everyone else. Aiden pressed the barrel of his pistol against the old man's forehead. Don't call me son. You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. You're right, Silas calmly agreed. I don't. I'm sorry. Something in the old man's voice, the complete lack of fear, made Aiden hesitate. His finger tightened on the trigger for a long moment before he yanked the gun away and continued down the aisle, muttering to himself. Silas Morrison, Master Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, 30 years of service before his retirement, allowed his heart rate to return to normal over the course of several deep breaths. Across the cabin, his eyes found the woman still lying on the floor near row 47, and he noticed something that made his old heart skip a beat. Her fingers were tapping against the carpet. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code, SOS, but not a cry for help, a sign, an identification. She was one of them, one of the quiet professionals who kept the country safe while its citizens slept. And she was letting anyone who could understand know that she was there, aware, and getting ready. Silas Morrison settled back in his seat and began very carefully to work at the plastic cuffs binding his wrists, using a technique he'd learned 40 years ago and never forgotten. The cavalry had arrived. They just didn't know it yet. 30 minutes into the hijacking, Derek made his first call on the satellite phone he'd brought aboard, hidden in a hollowed-out laptop battery. The conversation was in Russian, hers short and precise, and Hazel, still lying motionless on the floor, 8 rows away, understood every syllable. The package is secured, 2047 hostages, including the senator. We are on schedule. A pause as the voice on the other end replied, yes, the secondary target is contained. They won't be a factor. Secondary target. Hazel's blood, already cool in her veins from years of training, dropped a few more degrees. They knew someone on this plane was more than they seemed, and they had planned for it. The question was, did they know it was her specifically, or were they just guessing? Derek ended the call and put the phone into his jacket, his eyes sweeping the cabin with renewed intensity. Hazel let her body remain completely limp as his gaze passed over her, showing nothing but the bruised helplessness of a woman in shock. He lingered on her for just a moment too long. Then he turned to Mason. Bring her to the bathroom. Keep her there until we need her for the demonstration. Mason's grin spread across his face like oil on water. My pleasure, boss. Hazel felt rough hands grab her bound wrists and pull her upright. She stumbled, purposely catching herself against the seats on either side of the aisle, letting her legs give way just enough to strengthen the idea of a woman too scared to stand on her own. Mason half carried, half dragged her toward the restroom at the back of the aircraft, his fingers digging into her arm hard enough to leave marks. The other passengers watched in horror as she passed, some turning away, unable to watch what they assumed would happen next. The lavatory door slammed shut behind them, trapping Hazel in a space roughly 3 feet by 4 feet, with a man who outweighed her by nearly 100 pounds and clearly believed he had complete power over her. Mason pushed her against the sink, his body close. Just you and me now, Prince. Let's see what's under that hoodie. Hazel's eyes remained downcast, but her mind was calculating tactics at lightning speed. The mirror above the sink, tough glass but still breakable with enough force. The fire extinguisher next to the door, small but heavy. The toilet seat lid, ceramic, possibly deadly if used correctly. The soap dispenser, plastic casing over a metal part. She had identified 7 potential weapons in the first 3 seconds. Mason grabbed her chin, forcing her face up. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you one of those girls who likes it rough? Please, Hazel whispered, her voice trembling with perfectly faked fear. Please don't hurt me. I'll do whatever you want. Mason's eyes lit up with a hungry satisfaction. That's more like it. Now let's start with what do we have here? His hand moved to the collar of her hoodie, pulling it aside to show her shoulder. The scar on her left collarbone caught his attention. Been cutting yourself, princess? Sad little rich girl with sad little problem. Hazel said nothing, but inside she was counting backward from a very large number. The scar wasn't from self-harm, it was from the wire that had bound her wrists during 47 hours of questioning in a basement in Yemen, before she'd escaped by breaking her own thumb to slip free and killing 3 guards with nothing but a piece of broken glass. But Mason didn't need to know that. Not yet. His radio crackled, Derek's voice sharp with command. Mason, bring her back. We need to speed up the timeline. Blake found something in the passenger database. Mason scowled at the interruption, but he knew better than to ignore a direct order. We'll finish this later, princess. Count on it. He yanked open the door and shoved Hazel back into the cabin where she stumbled and fell, catching herself on the armrest of a seat. The seat occupied by Colonel James Crawford. For one heartbeat, her hand rested against his ankle. 3 pressure points, quick sequence, ready. 3 enemies, weapons, tactical code communicated through touch alone. Crawford's expression didn't change by even a tiny bit, but his index finger tapped once against his thigh, acknowledged, standing by. Hazel allowed herself to be dragged back toward the front of economy class, where Derek waited with a look of calculating interest on his sharp face. She kept her eyes down, her shoulders hunched, every line of her body showing defeated submission. But her mind was now connected to an ally, and the plan had changed. Derek studied the woman Mason dropped on the floor at his feet, with the cold analysis of a scientist examining a potentially interesting sample. She was smaller than he remembered from the cabin sweep, curled in on herself in a way that made her seem almost childlike. The blood had dried at the corner of her mouth, and a bruise was darkening on her left cheek where Mason had hit her. Pathetic. Exactly what he had expected when he chose her as the first victim for a show. Small, female, alone, no links to power or influence that might complicate things. Just a scared girl who would die prettily on camera, making the other passengers obey completely. Do you know why you're going to die? He asked casually, bending down to her level. The woman shook her head, still not meeting his eyes. Because you were asleep, Derek continued. Because while everyone else was terrified, you were snoring at the back of the plane like you didn't have a care in the world. I don't like people who don't pay attention, miss. What is it? He pulled her passport from his pocket, opening it. Cooper, Hazel Cooper, independent consultant. What do you consult on, Miss Cooper? Business strategy, Hazel stammered. I help companies make their operations more efficient. Derek laughed. The sound cold. Efficient. I like that word. Very corporate. Very clean. Do you know what I used to do, Miss Cooper? Before I became what I am now? No response, just trembling. I used to work for people who solved human problems. I was very good at it. Some might say I was an artist. He reached out and traced a finger along the line of her jaw, feeling her pull away. And now I'm going to use those skills to send a message to the world. You should feel honored. Your death will mean something. From 3 rows away, Noah Bennett watched through the gap between seats, his heart pounding. The woman who had refused to talk to him on the plane, who had seemed so cold and distant, was now the most defenseless person in the world. He wanted to do something, anything, but the plastic cuffs dug into his wrists, and in the memory of the gunshots from earlier, warning shots fired into the ceiling when the initial takeover occurred, kept him frozen. He noticed almost without thinking that the woman's trembling had a rhythm to it. Not the random shaking of fear, but something more controlled, almost like she was shivering to a specific beat. Noah Bennett was 19 years old, and had never seen violence more serious than a bar fight outside a fraternity party. He had no way to understand what he was seeing, but some part of his mind noticed the oddity and stored it away. Derek's satellite phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and stood. "Watch her," he ordered Mason. "I need to take this." He moved toward the front of the cabin, pressing the phone to his ear, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried just far enough for Hazel's trained ears to catch fragments. "Yes, the Sandman situation is contained. No indication they're on this flight." Sandman, her code name. They were hunting her specifically, not a random hijacking with a convenient target. A deliberate operation designed to kill her, disguised as a terrorist act. The senator, the other passengers, they were all a cover, a show for an assassination. Hazel felt the cold logic of the situation settle into her mind like ice forming on a winter lake. Someone had betrayed her, someone with access to her flight plans, her fake identity, her code name, someone inside the agency, and these 4 men were the weapon aimed at her heart. The plan changed again. This was no longer just a rescue operation. This was a hunt, and she intended to find out who had put a target on her back, no matter what it took. At the front of business class, Senator Martha Williams sat stiffly in seat 3A, her face showing a calm dignity she certainly didn't feel inside. 62 years old, 30 years in public service, and she had never been in a situation where her expensive education and political connections meant absolutely nothing. The young one, the nervous one who kept waving his gun around, had identified her 20 minutes ago. Since then she'd been waiting for the next bad thing to happen. "Senator Williams," Derek stood over her, the satellite phone gone into his pocket. "A genuine honor. I voted for you once, you know, back when I still believed in the system." "What do you want?" Williams asked, keeping her voice steady through sheer willpower. "If this is political, if you want something from the government, let's talk. I have connections. I can make things happen." Derek smiled, and the expression made Williams' old blood run cold. "I'm sure you can, Senator, but you misunderstand your value. I don't want to negotiate with you. I want you to be seen, to be witnessed. When we reach our destination, when the world watches what happens to the passengers of this flight, they'll see a United States Senator on her knees like everyone else. No special power, no protection, no special treatment." "You're making a mistake," Williams said quietly. "Whatever you think you'll achieve, it won't work. It never does. We'll see." Derek turned away, dismissing her as easily as he might swat a fly. "Blake, what did you find?" Blake Rivers had taken a laptop from one of the business class passengers and connected it to the plane's Wi-Fi system, which was now routed through his own equipment. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the skilled efficiency of someone who had spent years hacking digital systems. "I ran the passenger list through our database," he reported. "Most of them are clean, regular people, a few minor government employees. Nothing special. But one entry came back classified." Derek's eyebrows rose. "Classified? How?" "Access denied. Complete blackout. I can't even see the file name. Someone on this plane has government protection at the highest level." Derek's gaze moved through the cabin, suddenly looking at every face again. "Not the senator. She's listed normally. Listed in detail by 3 separate agencies. She's not." "The old man Crawford in 8A. Blake checked. "James Crawford, military consultant, retired. Some classified operations in his past, but nothing active." "Then who?" Blake shook his head. "The system won't tell me. Whatever we're looking at, it's above my pay grade. Could be CIA, could be NSA, could be something even deeper." Derek turned slowly, his eyes landing on the huddled figure of Hazel Cooper on the floor near row 15, where Mason had dragged her for questioning. "Her," he said softly. Blake followed his gaze. "The consultant, she's nobody. I checked her file. It's clean. Too clean," Derek mumbled. "A real business consultant would have tax records, property details, company connections, digital traces everywhere. What does her file show?" Blake pulled up the entry. "Hazel Cooper, age 32, independent consultant specializing in business strategy. 1 bank account, 2 credit cards,
an apartment lease in Arlington, Virginia. No social media, no photographs, no history before 5 years ago. Blake's fingers flew across the keyboard. Nothing before. It's like she didn't exist. Derek smiled, and this time the expression held something that might have been real pleasure. Because she didn't. Not as Hazel Cooper anyway. He walked back toward his hostage, his steps slow and deliberate. Our intelligence was incomplete. They said Sandman might be on this flight, but they didn't tell us who to look for. He bent down in front of Hazel again, studying her face with new interest. She looked up at him through her hair, showing confusion and fear. "You're very good," Derek said quietly, conversationally, as if they were two co-workers discussing a professional matter. The trembling, the submission, the pathetic helpless act. "I almost bought it. I don't understand," Hazel whispered. "Please, I'm just a consultant." "I don't know what you're talking about, Sandman," Derek said, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Nothing. Complete blankness. The confused fear of an innocent woman, but for just an instant, less than a fraction of a second, her pupils had shrunk. "Interesting," Derek murmured. He stood, addressing Mason without looking away from her. "Forget the bathroom. Keep her here where I can see her, and watch her hands." From his position in row 8A, Colonel Crawford watched the exchange with growing worry. Derek was smarter than the average terrorist, more observant, more dangerous. If he was specifically hunting an operative, and if he'd somehow identified Hazel as a person of interest, the timeline had just sped up dramatically. Crawford caught the eye of the flight attendant, moving through economy with a water pitcher. Jade Parker, according to her name tag, though he doubted that was her real name. He'd noticed the way she carried herself, the constant awareness of her surroundings, the almost invisible bulge at her ankle that suggested a backup weapon, even though the hijackers had taken her service pistol. A federal air marshal. Their eyes met for perhaps half a second. In that time, Crawford's fingers moved in a series of subtle gestures, military hand signals modified for secret use. "Friendly agent in danger. Need teamwork. Your lead." Jade's response came in the tilt of her head, and the position of her fingers on the water pitcher. "Acknowledged. Hold position. Wait for chance." Crawford settled back in his seat, his outward calm unchanged, despite the tactical thoughts racing through his mind. 2 operatives, possibly 3 if Morrison in row 35 was what he suspected, plus the unknown skills of the woman Derek was now treating as a top threat. The odds were shifting. Not enough yet, but shifting. The next 90 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Derek held his position near the front of economy, dividing his attention between managing his team, monitoring communications, and watching the woman who might or might not be the agent known as Sandman. Mason slouched in an empty row, his gun pointed loosely in Hazel's direction, his expression shifting between boredom and anticipation. Blake stayed in the cockpit, ensuring the plane remained on course for whatever destination they had planned. And Aiden continued his restless patrol, growing more agitated with each passing hour. The passengers had settled into the numb acceptance that often marked hostage situations, their initial terror giving way to a dull, grinding fear that seemed almost manageable by comparison. Parents comforted children, strangers held hands, a few brave souls whispered prayers or words of encouragement to their neighbors.
Lily Hayes in row 32 held her 4-year-old daughter Daisy close, trying to shield the child from the worst of what was happening around them. Daisy clutched a stuffed rabbit, her face buried against her mother's chest, occasionally asking in a small voice when they would be allowed to get off the plane. "Soon, baby," Lily whispered, not believing it herself. Soon. 4 rows ahead, Silas Morrison had successfully loosened his plastic cuffs to the point where he could slip them off in about 2 seconds if needed. His eyes remained on the young hijacker, Aiden, tracking his movements, identifying the moments of greatest distraction. In business class, Colonel Crawford had achieved a similar state of readiness, his restraints weakened, but still appearing secure. He'd also managed to palm a small metal pin from the armrest mechanism, a makeshift lockpick that could become a weapon if necessary. And on the floor near row 15, Hazel Cooper lay with her eyes closed, her breathing shallow, her body seemingly limp with exhaustion and fear. But her mind was working. A plan had formed over the past 90 minutes, improved with each new piece of information she gathered. She knew the positions of all 4 hijackers. She knew the locations of possible allies. She knew the timing of Aiden's patrol pattern and the moments when attention on her slipped. She had identified the weak points of the aircraft and the narrow passages that could be used. Most importantly, she'd managed to get a weapon. During her move from the bathroom back to the main cabin, Jade Parker had passed close by, pretending to check on a sick passenger. In that moment of closeness, a pen had slipped from the flight attendant's pocket, bouncing off Hazel's hip and landing beneath her bound hands. Not just any pen, a tactical pen. Heavy aluminum body with a hardened steel tip. Designed to write, yes, but also to break glass, hit nerve points and pierce soft tissue. It now rested against Hazel's palm, hidden by the fold of her hoodie sleeve, waiting. She was ready, but the timing wasn't right. Not yet. The trigger came 93 minutes into the hijacking, in the form of a 4-year-old girl and a stuffed rabbit. Daisy Hayes had been quiet for most of the ordeal, her face hidden against her mother's body, her small fingers clutching her toy with desperate strength. But children have limits, and Daisy had reached hers. She needed to use the bathroom. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice carrying in the tense silence of the cabin. "Mommy, I have to go." Lily's heart nearly stopped. "Just hold it, sweetheart. A little longer." "I can't, Mommy, I really can't." Aiden Mills heard the exchange from 3 rows away. His head snapped around, his eyes locking onto the child with an intensity that made Lily's blood freeze. "What's the problem over here?" "Nothing," Lily said quickly. Too quickly. "She's just tired. We're fine." "Didn't ask if you were fine." Aiden stalked closer, his gun leading the way. "I asked what the problem is." Daisy, seeing the weapon, let out a small cry of fear and pulled away from her mother's arms, falling into the aisle in her panic. "Daisy, no." The little girl scrambled to her feet and ran, pure instinct driving her away from the scary man with the gun, her stuffed rabbit trailing behind her. Aiden's face twisted with rage. "Stop. Stop right there." He lunged after her, grabbing her arm, spinning her around to face him. Daisy screamed, high and piercing, the sound cutting through the cabin like a blade. "Shut up." Aiden jammed the barrel of his pistol against the child's temple. "Shut up or I'll give you something to scream about." Lily Hayes dropped to her knees, her hands raised in pleading. "Please, please don't hurt her. She's just a baby. Please. I'll do anything." I said, "Shut up." The cabin had become deadly silent. 46 people held their breath, watching a 23-year-old man with a gun pressed against the head of a 4-year-old girl. Derek stepped forward, his voice carrying quiet command. "Aiden, control yourself." "She ran from me." Aiden spat, his hand shaking visibly now. "She needs to learn. They all need to learn. She's a child." "So what? You said no exception. You said anyone who steps out of line gets made an example of." His finger moved toward the trigger. "This counts as out of line." Derek's eyes met Mason's across the cabin. A silent message passed between them. Aiden was losing control. His inexperience and beliefs were making him dangerously unpredictable. "Let her go," Derek said, his voice taking on a steely edge. "That's an order." "Don't give me orders," Aiden screamed, the gun now clearly trembling against Daisy's head. "You're not my commander." "Nobody commands me. I'm doing this for the cause." Lily collapsed fully, sobs shaking her body. "Please, please my baby, please." From his position in row 8A, Colonel Crawford tensed. This was about to go very wrong very quickly. He could intervene, probably, but the distance was too great. By the time he reached Aiden, the trigger would already be pulled. His eyes found Hazel Cooper, still lying motionless on the floor near row 5. She was closer, much closer, and for the first time since the hijacking began, her eyes were open. Not the unfocused, terrified eyes of a victim, but the flat, calm, absolutely deadly eyes of a hunter choosing her moment. Hazel's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. "Put the gun down." 6 words spoken softly, almost casual, but something in their tone made Aiden's head snap around, made every person in the cabin turn toward the small woman who had just pushed herself up from the floor. Her bound hands hung in front of her. Her face was still bruised, still bloody. Her body still seemed small and delicate in the oversized hoodie.
But she was standing now and something fundamental had changed. "What did you say to me?" Aiden demanded, his gun momentarily shifting away from Daisy's head. "I said, put the gun down." Hazel took a step forward, then another. Her movement was unhurried, almost lazy, like a cat stretching after a long nap. "You're scared, I understand. This wasn't what you imagined it would be. But if you hurt that little girl, there's no coming back from it. Not for your cause, not for your soul, not for anything. You don't know anything about me. I know you haven't killed before." Another step. "I know your hands are shaking because your body is smarter than your brain right now. It knows this is wrong. It's trying to stop you." Derek watched with narrowed eyes, his hand moving toward his own weapon. Something was happening here that he didn't fully understand. A change in power that went beyond a hostage, simply breaking down. Mason was already moving to intercept, his massive body pushing through the air as he closed the distance toward the woman who had been his intended victim. Aiden's attention was fully on Hazel now, the gun's barrel tracking toward her chest. "Back off. Get back on the ground. No, one word. Absolute. Final. I'll shoot you," Aiden stammered, his voice cracking. "Then shoot me." Hazel stopped 5 feet from him, her bound hands visible at her waist. "But let the girl go first. That's all I'm asking. Let her mother take her, and then you can do whatever you want to me." For a long moment, the cabin held its breath. Then Aiden's hand moved, pushing Daisy away from him, the gun coming up to aim directly at Hazel's heart. Lily scrambled forward, grabbing her daughter, pulling her back toward the relative safety of their row. "Now you," Aiden said, some of his earlier boldness returning now that he had an adult target rather than a child. "On your knees. One more thing, Hazel." And now there was something in her voice, something cold and sharp that hadn't been there before. "Before you pull that trigger, you should probably check if your gun is loaded." Aiden's face twisted with confusion. "What? Ammunition?" Hazel clarified almost helpfully. "Little metal things that make the gun work. I'm just curious if yours has any." "Of course. It's loaded, you stupid." Aiden pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. His eyes went wide, his thumb fumbling for the magazine release. He never completed the motion. Hazel moved. In the time it took Aiden Mills to realize his weapon was useless, she had closed the distance between them, her bound hands coming up in a precise arc that drove the heel of her palm into his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping, and she continued her motion, her elbow hitting his temple in a strike that dropped him to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. 2.3 seconds, one enemy down. Mason Cole roared and charged from her left, his huge frame barreling toward her with murder in his eye. Hazel pivoted, using his own weight against him to change his direction, and as he stumbled past her, her bound hands found his wrist and twisted. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the cab. Mason screamed, clutching his ruined joint, and Hazel's knee came up to meet his face with perfect aim. He went down hard and stayed down. 4.1 seconds. 2 enemies neutralized. Blake Rivers burst from the cockpit, his knife already moving. He was faster than the others, more trained, his bomb disposal background giving him a foundation of discipline that Aiden and Mason lacked. He closed the distance instantly, blade seeking Hazel's throat. She saw his approach, predicted his angle, and stepped inside his reach where the knife couldn't connect. Her elbow drove into his temple with the same devastating efficiency she'd used on Aiden. Blake's eyes rolled back and he collapsed. 5.8 seconds. 3. Derek Stone had his pistol up and aimed before the third body hit the floor. "Don't move." Hazel froze, her chest heaving slightly with effort, her eyes locked on the last remaining hijacker across 10 feet of aircraft aisle. "I knew it," Derek said softly, a smile spreading across his face despite the situation. "I knew you were Sandman. From the moment they showed me the classified file, I knew you'd be on this flight." "Then you know how this ends," Hazel replied, her voice steady, despite the gun pointed at her heart. "Do I? You're good, I'll give you that. Better than good. But there's a gun aimed at you, and I don't miss at this range." The cabin around them had erupted into chaos, passengers screaming and scrambling away from the violence. But in the center of the storm, 2 professionals faced each other with the cold calculation of chess masters nearing the end of a game. "You're right," Hazel admitted. You don't miss. But before you pull that trigger, let me ask you something. What? Why did you defect? Derek's smile flickered. Excuse me, 12 years of service, excellent record, 3 commendations. Then suddenly you're selling secrets to anyone with money, and organizing hijacking. That's a pretty dramatic career change. What happened? You think talking will save you? No, Hazel said simply, but I am curious. Was it money, beliefs? Did someone break your heart? For a moment, something shifted behind Derek's empty eye, a shadow of the man he might have been before. Whatever change had created this cold killer. I saw the truth, he said quietly, about what we do, what we really do, the lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. I decided I'd rather be honest about what I am. And what are you? A weapon. Like you, the only difference is I chose my own targets. The difference, Hazel corrected, is that I never pointed my weapon at a 4-year-old girl. Derek's finger tightened on the trigger, and in that moment, while his attention was focused entirely on the woman in front of him, Colonel James Crawford surged up from seat 8A with 33 years of combat experience driving his movements. Derek sensed the motion a fraction of a second too late. He started to turn, started to redirect his aim, but Crawford was already there, his palm slamming into Derek's wrist with perfectly timed force. The pistol fired, the shot going wide, punching through a window panel and setting off the aircraft's emergency procedure. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Alarm sirens began to wail, and in the confusion, Hazel Cooper completed her movement, closing the distance to Derek in 2 steps. Her bound hands found his throat in a chokehold that cut off blood flow to the brain. Derek struggled, his training kicking in, but Crawford had already secured his weapon arm, and Silas Morrison had appeared from somewhere to grab his legs, and Jade Parker was there with plastic cuffs that had appeared from her ankle holster. 7 seconds of coordinated chaos. Then Derek Stone's eyes rolled back and his body went limp. 37 seconds from the first strike to the final takedown, 4 enemies neutralized. The screaming of 233 passengers slowly faded into stunned silence as they processed what had just happened. And in the center of the aisle, surrounded by unconscious hijackers and emergency oxygen masks, Hazel Cooper stood with her chest heaving and her hands still bound and her hoodie torn at the shoulder that now revealed a tattoo, a dagger thrust through a skull, framed by Latin words D, oppresso liber, and beneath it in stark black numbers, 0847. Colonel James Crawford straightened from his crouch over the restrained Derek Stone, his eyes finding the marking that had been hidden beneath layers of fabric and disguise. His hand came up slowly, deliberately, touching his forehead in a salute that carried the weight of 33 years of service. Operator 0847, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Codename Sandman, Selection Group 47, Class of 2. He swallowed hard. I designed half of the course that tried to break you. You were top of your class. Hazel met his eyes, and for the first time since the hijacking began, something close to recognition flickered across her face. Colonel Crawford, you wrote my graduation letter. I remember every word. He held the salute for a long moment, then dropped his hand to his side. You haven't changed. Still the best I ever trained. Around them the cabin was changing from a hostage situation to something else entirely. Passengers were cutting each other's plastic cuffs with a ceramic knife. Blake had dropped. Jade Parker was speaking rapidly into a satellite phone, coordinating with whoever controlled emergency response for situations like this. Captain Webb's voice came over the intercom, announcing that they were diverting to the nearest safe airport. But in the aisle, surrounded by chaos, 2 operatives stood in a moment of professional recognition that went beyond the circumstances. How did you know? Crawford asked quietly. About the ammunition. A ghost of a smile crossed Hazel's face. I didn't, but he hesitated when I challenged him, and that told me he wasn't sure either. Probably forgot to put a round in the chamber when they first showed themselves. Amateur mistake. And if you'd been wrong, then I'd be dead, and you'd have had a clear shot at him while he was distracted. She shrugged slightly, the motion pulling at her injured shoulder. Either way, the girl was safe. Crawford shook his head slowly. You haven't changed at all. Before Hazel could respond, a small body crashed into her legs. Daisy Hayes had broken free from her mother's grip and thrown her arms around the woman who had saved her life, her face buried against Hazel's torn hoodie. "Thank you," the little girl whispered. "Thank you for saving me from the scary man." Hazel looked down at the child, and something shifted in her expression. The cold calculation that had carried her through the past 40 minutes softened just slightly into something more human. She knelt down, bringing herself to Daisy's level, and gently brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face. "You were very brave," she said softly. "Even braver than me." Really? I had training, you just had courage." Lily Hayes arrived, tears streaming down her face, pulling Daisy into a crushing embrace, while reaching out to touch Hazel's arm with her free hand. Thank you. Take care of her," Hazel said simply. "She's going to be okay." She rose, turning away from the emotional scene, and found Noah Bennett standing in the aisle with his mouth hanging open. "You were sitting next to me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For 6 hours you were just sitting there." "I was tired," Hazel offered. "I tried to talk to you about my computer science project. It sounded interesting." "You fell asleep in the middle of my sentence." It was a long sentence. Noah stared at her for a long moment, processing everything he thought he knew about the world, and finding most of it suddenly insufficient. "I think I need to change my major," he said finally. Despite everything, despite the blood on her face, and the ache in her muscles, and the knowledge that this ordeal was far from over, Hazel felt her lips twitch towards something that might have been a smile. Then Jade Parker was at her side, pressing a satellite phone into her hands, her expression serious. "Sandman, Langley is on the line. They need to talk to you immediately." The smile died before it fully formed. Hazel lifted the phone to her ear. "This is Sandman. Go ahead." The voice on the other end was familiar. Agent Caleb Harris, one of her handlers, a man she'd worked with for nearly a decade. "Good work on the plane," he said without delay. "We're tracking your situation. Diversion to Reykjavik is confirmed. Recovery team will meet you on the ground." "What's the threat assessment?" A pause. "That's why I'm calling. The hijackers. They weren't working alone. Derek Stone, his former agency. We knew that. What we didn't know is that he had inside help." Hazel's blood, already cool from operational discipline, dropped another few degrees. "Define inside help." "Someone in the agency gave him your flight itinerary, your fake identity, your code name. Someone with high-level access." Another pause. "We have a mole, Sandman, and until we identify them, you're to assume that any communication can be compromised." "Understood." "What are my orders?" "Officially you're on mandatory leave as of touchdown. Full pay, full benefits. No operational duties until further notice." He held up a hand to stop her objection. I know you would rather be hunting this person down yourself. But think about it from the agency's point of view. Every mission you run, every contact you make, every piece of information you handle could be compromised. We can't risk it." Hazel sat in silence for a long moment, processing the implications. She had been an operative for 12 years. Her entire adult life had been defined by missions, goals, target. The idea of sitting on the sidelines while someone else hunted the person who had tried to kill her was almost physically painful. But Harris was right. If Spectre had access to her operational details, then any move she made through official channels would be anticipated and blocked. She would be fighting with one hand tied behind her back. And in her line of work, that kind of disadvantage got people killed. "Fine," she said finally. "I'll take the leave." Harris's relief was clear. "Thank you."
I know this is difficult, but it's the right choice. I have one condition. Name it. Everything you learn about Spectre, everything about the mole investigation, I want to know. Through unofficial channels, secret drops, whatever methods you need to maintain deniability. But I stay informed. Harris considered this for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card, sliding it across the table. "An address, a cabin in Montana. Someone wants to meet you," he said. "Off the books. No agency involvement, no official approval. I'm only telling you this because I think you need to hear what they have to say." Hazel looked at the card, memorizing the coordinates before sliding it back across the table. "Who?" "I don't know. The request came through channels I didn't know existed, from someone with clearance levels I've never seen. Harris stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Be careful, Hazel. Trust no one, especially anyone who claims to be helping you. The words echoed what he had told her on the satellite phone 3 days earlier. Coming from anyone else, the repetition might have seemed paranoid. Coming from Caleb Harris, it felt like a warning. 2 days later, Hazel drove a rented pickup truck through the mountains of western Montana, following roads that grew progressively narrower and more dangerous as she climbed toward the coordinates on the card. The landscape was beautiful in a wild way, all snow-capped peaks and pine forests and vast open spaces untouched by human development. The kind of place where a person could disappear and never be found if they didn't want to be. The kind of place where someone might choose to hide from the entire intelligence network of the United States government. The cabin appeared around a final bend in the road, nestled into a clearing surrounded by ancient pine. It was small, well-kept, with a thin curl of smoke rising from the chimney. An old Jeep Wagoneer sat in the driveway, its tires caked with mud. Hazel pulled in beside it and shut off the engine. For a long moment, she sat in the silence, her hand resting on the pistol hidden beneath her jacket. Every instinct she had developed over 12 years of operational work was screaming that this was a trap, that she was walking into an ambush, that the person waiting inside that cabin was just as likely to be an enemy as an ally. But the alternative was doing nothing, and Hazel Cooper had never been good at doing nothing. She stepped out of the truck, her boots crunching on frozen ground, her eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of surveillance or hostile presence. Nothing. Just snow and silence and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. The cabin door opened before she reached the porch. The man who stepped out was approximately 60 years old, tall and thin, with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in harsh conditions. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, cutting his cheek like a fault line. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, and they held the kind of flat, judging quality that Hazel recognized from her own reflection. This was a man who had killed before, many times. Recently her hand tightened on the grip of her hidden weapon. Hazel Cooper, the man said, his voice a rough rasp that spoke of old throat injuries. Code name, Sandman. 12 years with SAD, 17 confirmed operations, 34 targets eliminated. He smiled, and the expression held no warmth at all. I've been waiting for you. Who are you? Someone who has information you need. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the cabin's interior. Come inside. We have a lot to discuss. Every tactical instinct told her to refuse, to demand answers out here where she had room to move, where she could reach her vehicle if things went wrong. But something else, some deeper intuition that had saved her life more times than she could count, told her that this man was not her enemy. Not yet anyway. She walked past him into the cabin, her senses taking in every detail of the interior. A single room, simply furnished, with a wood-burning stove in one corner and a small kitchen in another. Walls lined with bookshelves, their contents a mix of military history and philosophy. A desk near the window covered with maps and documents and photographs. Dozens of photographs pinned to a corkboard above the desk, connected by strings of red yarn in the manner of a conspiracy theorist's wild dream. Except Hazel recognized some of the faces. Agency personnel, current and former, including her own. What is this? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. The man closed the door behind them and moved to stand beside the corkboard. 20 years of investigation, every name, every connection, every link I've been able to trace. He pointed to a photograph in the center, a face obscured by shadow. This is Spectre, or at least, this is as close as I've been able to get to them. Hazel moved closer, studying the board. Her photograph was there, connected by a red string to Derek Stone's mugshot, which was in turn connected to a series of financial transactions and communication intercepts. How do you know about Spectre? The man was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached up and touched the photograph at the center of the board. Because Spectre tried to have me killed 20 years ago. He turned to face her, and something in his expression shifted. Just like they tried to have your father killed. The words hit Hazel like a physical blow. My father died on a mission, she said, her voice flat. Operational accident in Beirut, 2004. I was 12 years old. That's what the official report said. The man reached for a folder on the desk.
thick with documents, and held it out to her. The truth is considerably more complicated. Hazel took the folder with hands that wanted to tremble but refused. She opened it, her eyes scanning the first page, and the world she had known for 20 years began to crack along its foundations. Mission debrief transcripts that directly contradicted the official story. Surveillance photographs of her father in places he had never officially visited. Communication intercepts that suggested his mission had been compromised from the inside, and a name appearing again and again in the margins. Spectre. Thomas Cooper was one of the best operatives the agency ever produced, the man said quietly. He was also getting too close to exposing a network of corruption that reached the highest levels of the intelligence community. Spectre arranged his elimination and made it look like an accident. Hazel's hands tightened on the folder, the paper crinkling slightly under the pressure. How do you know this? Because I was there. The man's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I was the one they sent to kill him. The pistol was in Hazel's hand before she consciously decided to draw it. The barrel leveled at the man's chest, her finger resting on the trigger guard. Give me one reason not to pull this trigger right now. The man didn't flinch, didn't reach for a weapon, didn't show any sign of fear at all. Because I didn't do it, he said simply. I had your father in my sights, I had the shot, and I couldn't take it. He touched the scar on his face. This is what I got for that decision. Spectre's people found me before I could disappear, tortured me for 3 days, left me for dead in a ditch outside Moscow. You expect me to believe that? I don't expect you to believe anything. I expect you to He nodded toward the folder in her left hand. Everything's in there. Names, dates, evidence trails, things that can be checked, cross-referenced, confirmed or denied. I've spent 20 years gathering this information, hiding from people who want me dead, waiting for the right moment to strike back, and you are that moment. The man smiled again, and this time there was something almost like warmth in the expression. You're Thomas Cooper's daughter. You have skills, training, and most importantly, motivation. You want to know who tried to kill you on that plane. I want to know who ordered your father's death. Our interests align. Hazel kept the gun steady, her mind racing through possibilities. He could be telling the truth. He could be an elaborate plant, a mole within a mole sent to trick her into some action that would serve Spectre's interests. He could be crazy, deluded, a man who had built an entire conspiracy theory around events that had simpler explanations. But the folder in her hand felt real, and the questions that had haunted her since childhood, the inconsistency in the official account of her father's death that she had never been able to explain, suddenly had answers, answers she desperately wanted to believe. What's your name? She asked finally. The agency knew me as codename Ghost. My real name doesn't matter anymore. He gestured toward the folder. What matters is what's in there and what you're going to do with it. Hazel lowered the gun, though she didn't put it away. What do you expect me to do? Exactly what you've been doing your whole career. Hunt, pursue, eliminate threats. Ghost moved to stand beside the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. Spectre has been hiding in the shadows for decades, protected by layers of bureaucracy and secrecy. They have killed operatives, compromised missions, sold secrets to the highest bidder, all while wearing the mask of a patriot. And you want me to expose them. I want you to destroy them. He turned to face her, and the cold fury in his eyes was unmistakable. I want you to burn down everything they've built, everyone they've corrupted, every safe house and fake company, and cutout they've ever used. I want Spectre to know, in the final moments before you end them, that Thomas Cooper's daughter is the one who brought them down. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. Hazel thought about her father, about the way he used to carry her on his shoulders through the park near their house in Virginia, about the last time she had seen him, waving goodbye at the airport before another business trip that wasn't really a business trip at all, about the memorial service, with the closed casket and the flag, and the officers who couldn't meet her mother's eyes. She had become an operative because of her father, because she wanted to serve the country he had served, because she wanted to believe his death had meaning. Now she was being told that his death had been murder, that the country he had served had betrayed him, that everything she thought she knew was a lie. The pistol disappeared back into its holster. Show me everything, she said. Ghost nodded, the ghost of a smile crossing his scarred face. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, placing it in her palm. This contains everything I've gathered: evidence, analysis, names, locations. Some of it is incomplete, fragmented, but it's enough to start. He closed her fingers around the drive. Be careful with it. If Spectre learns you have this, they'll come for you with everything they have. Let them come. You sound like your father. Hazel met his eyes, and something passed between them. Recognition perhaps, or understanding, the kind of connection that forms between people who have walked the same dark paths and emerged strong but unbroken. What about you? She asked. What happens now? I disappear again. Different location, different identity. It's what I've been doing for 20 years. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. One more thing, the hijacking on your flight. It wasn't just about eliminating you. Spectre was sending a message. What kind of message? A warning to anyone who might be getting too close to the truth. They wanted to show that no one is safe, no matter how trained, no matter how protected. His colorless eyes found hers. They failed, and now they're scared. Scared of what? Ghost opened the door, letting in a blast of cold mountain air. Scared of you, Hazel. Scared of what you might do now that you know the truth. He stepped out onto the porch, his outline framed against the snow-bright landscape. Your father used to say that the most dangerous person in the world is someone with nothing left to lose. Spectre just took everything from you. Your career, your safety, your peace of mind. He turned to look at her one final time. They created exactly the kind of enemy they should have been afraid of all along. Then he was gone, disappearing into the tree line with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades avoiding being seen. Hazel stood in the doorway of the empty cabin, the USB drive clutched in her hand, watching the space where Ghost had vanished, until the cold drove her back inside. The corkboard still hung on the wall, its web of photographs and connections, waiting to be understood. She moved toward it, her eyes tracing the red strings that linked names and faces, and events spanning 2 decades of betrayal. Her father's photograph was there, pinned near the center. Thomas Cooper smiling in his dress uniform, the same image that had sat on her mother's mantelpiece throughout Hazel's childhood. She reached up and touched it gently, feeling the worn edges of the paper. I'll find them, Dad, she whispered. I'll find them, and I'll make them pay for what they did to you. The photograph offered no response, but somewhere deep in Hazel's chest, something that had been cold for a very long time began to warm. Purpose, direction, Ray. Finally given a target after 20 years of unfocused sorrow, she pulled the photograph from the board and slipped it into her pocket, then turned to survey the rest of the cabin. Ghost had left everything behind: the books, the maps, the documents. A lifetime of investigation, offered freely to the woman who might finally complete his work. Hazel spent the next 4 hours organizing everything, photographing documents, checking names, building a mental map of the conspiracy that had destroyed her family and threatened her life. The sun was setting behind the mountains when she finally emerged from the cabin, the USB drive secure in her pocket alongside her father's photograph. The pickup truck started on the first try, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness as she began the long drive back to civilization. Somewhere out there Spectre was waiting, watching, planning their next move, but they had made a critical error. They had assumed that killing Hazel Cooper would solve their problem. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous than a single operative. They had awakened a daughter seeking justice for her father, a warrior who had spent 12 years learning exactly how to destroy the enemies of her country, a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The road stretched out before her, winding through mountains that had witnessed centuries of history and would witness centuries more. Behind her the cabin faded into the darkness, its secrets now transferred to new hands. Hazel's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Unknown number, 3 words. Welcome to the hunt. She smiled, the expression cold and sharp in the reflection of the rearview mirror. The hunt had already begun, and this time she was the hunter. The pickup truck crested a hill, and the lights of a distant town appeared on the horizon, a cluster of human warmth against the vast darkness of the Montana wilderness. Hazel pulled to the side of the road and sat for a moment in silence, looking at the lights, thinking about all the people down there living their ordinary lives, unaware of the secret wars being fought to protect them. Her father had died in those shadows. She had spent her entire adult life in those shadows, and now she would use those shadows to destroy the people who had corrupted everything she believed in. She reached for her phone and dialed a number from memory. "Sandman," she said when the line connected. "Tell Harris I'm ready to come in." A pause on the other end. "Understood. We'll arrange transport." And Sandman, "Yes, welcome back." Hazel ended the call and sat in the darkness, the USB drive warm in her pocket, her father's photograph pressed against her heart. Somewhere in the vast machinery of American intelligence, a mole named Spectre was sleeping peacefully, believing their secrets were safe. They were wrong. The daughter of Thomas Cooper was coming for them, and she would not stop until every shadow had been revealed, every traitor exposed, every debt paid in full. The engine rumbled to life, and the pickup truck pulled back onto the road, carrying Hazel Cooper toward whatever came next. Behind her, the mountains stood silent witness to the beginning of something that would shake the foundations of power across 3 continents. The hunt was on, and Sandman never failed to complete a mission. What you just saw wasn't simply a story of action and revenge. It was a reminder that the most dangerous people in any room are often the ones you'd never expect. Hazel Cooper endured 93 minutes of insult, abuse and degradation. She was slapped, spat upon, dragged across the floor like worthless cargo. And through it all she remained silent, not because she was weak, but because true strength isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about knowing exactly who you are and waiting for the moment when action matters most. The lesson here is deep. In a world obsessed with loud voices and instant reactions, there is immense power in patience, in observation, in strategic silence. The hijackers saw a sleeping woman and assumed she was vulnerable. They never imagined that the smallest person on that plane was also the most deadly. We all face moments when the world underestimates us, when people judge us based on how we look, our gender, age, or situation. The question isn't whether those moments will come. The question is how we respond. Will we waste energy trying to prove ourselves to people who don't matter, or will we save that energy for the moments that truly count? Hazel Cooper chose the latter, and 2047 people went home to their families because of that choice. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. Because sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who change everything.